The good, the bad about grow lighting.
The best use and application for each, flowering or lack thereof.
We're going to talk about a lot of different things as far as lighting amongst HIDs, and that involves high-pressure sodium, metal halide, double-ended high-pressure sodium.
Fluorescents, including T5s, T8s, yes, those older fixtures that you used to use, T12s, CFLs, induction fluorescents,
LEDs, plasma lighting, LECs, or commonly known as ceramic metal halides.
There we go. So here is a very interesting topic. It's a question we get all the time from commercial and residential growers. What is the best grow light for my application? And it's a complicated question. There's a lot of elements involved. We could attack it from so many different angles. We could attack it from the angles of what type of grower they are, what size of room they have, or what their goal is. But let's just go down and talk about each light, because that might be a more efficient way, and how that might fit different applications. So do you mind starting, Steve, with what you think is the most important to start with?
The most common is definitely the high-pressure sodium. That's going to be the tried-and-true flowering lamp, although a lot of people use them for vegetative growth. It's just known to be the most commercial fixture. It has a very broad spectrum, but still has peaks and valleys. I mean, it's mostly dominant in the yellow-red spectrum, which is very inducive for flowering. Metal halide is also classified as an HID lamp, but it's going to be more halogen gas, which is going to emit more of an ultraviolet blue radiation. So most people think of MH, metal halides, for vegetative growth or using them supplementally with their HPS lights. So, I mean, the big thing is just knowing the difference between the two. I mean, the quality of light that comes out of both these lights is very broad, so that's why you can use them in either setting. However, the difference of the spectrum is favored more veg for MH versus flowering for HPS. The double-ended bulbs have become extremely popular because of the little higher intensity. They operate at a little larger of a voltage, and so it's going to be a little more efficient as far as the use of power, while still having a bit broader of a spectrum than the standard single-ended HPS.
And they even have in the DE world now metal halides, which are more like these mining lamps that have been adapted and people are using in the grow industry. They don't last very long, but DE lamps in general, the HPS, they do provide, what have we tested, about 8% to 12% higher efficiency over the highest single-ended that we tested. Double-ended lamps give the advantage of having an arc tube that's supported at both sides. Therefore, it provides no shade spot where the arc tube is, but it also actually supplies a little bit more light output as well. And because it's in double-ended mode inside the fixture itself, it keeps the slouch that we see in older reflectors right off the mogul socket from happening. So you get the light to be as balanced in the reflector, providing an even light footprint as possible. So DE has definitely brought some commercial advantages to the existing HPS market. HPS, Steve, don't you agree, makes up roughly 8% of our total market that we see and come in contact with?
Definitely. I was going to say well above 90%.
And so there are a lot of other products available on the market. And if you're flowering plants and you're doing it commercially, or you're doing it basically for flower size and for your commercialability of that flower or fruit, you're probably going to be looking at the HPS to do the load of the work. Metal halides, like Steve, like you said, I agree. Vegetative, mothering especially. I think metal halides, the best niche right now is for mothering. Because you're growing tall plants, you need high intensity, great brands available on the market to give an awesome output. Genesis is one of those brands that we really stand behind. It's our favorite mother lamp for the price and as well for the performance. But we also know fluorescents do a great job of vegetating plants as well. Would you agree?
Fluorescents have been very common for veg just because, I mean, they don't produce as much heat, and so a lot of times people don't need as large of an exhaust fan, especially you don't have to worry about air cooling them. Granted, they do generate some heat still because they are individually 54 watts. So, I mean, they add up. But at the same time, directly off the bulb itself, it doesn't seem overly warm compared to an HID. And so I see them more as vegetative for smaller plants, doing them in like a rack type system where they can stack many plants into a given area. Commonly for cloning or propagating plants or young seedlings, that's when fluorescents have really started off to become very popular.
Yeah, so T5s are very popular. I personally recommend T12s actually still for cloning, because you can get the clones really close to that T12.
T5's a little intense.
It is a little intense. We see as growers trying to propagate clones, and they've raised their T5s like 3 feet off the plants.
Right.
And it's just not a good efficiency of light. So if you're just using the light strictly, or that bay on the rack for propagating clones, you might want to look at T12 still. And they still have horticultural spec T12s available on the market. CFLs. We see people use CFLs. Typically, it's a residential type of gardening application. The problem with CFLs is, one, they slouch, and they don't tend to have that lifespan that's stated on the box for whatever reason. So I'm not a big fan of CFLs at all. It's outdated, and whenever you have them in a non-vertical operation, they always slouch, especially those larger ones, the 120 watts and 240 watts. Those things were ridiculous. Those giant, round, 240 watt CFLs that everybody had. I'm probably speculating those are probably the biggest electrical hazard product I've seen come out in the market. We've seen an evolution with induction fluorescence, which is a fluorescent. It's a little different. Mind explaining a little bit of that technology, Steve?
Well, the biggest thing that you'll notice is a very even distribution of the light. That's with any fluorescent. As you know, it's a long tube, and so you're going to have even distribution. You won't have just one single focal point. So with the induction fluorescent, it's a oval shaped, and so what it does is it has two magnets on either side that basically help drive the gas. You're going to have still gas rotating amongst the tube, but the magnet that's inside is what's mostly driving it and basically igniting that gas.
It's electrodeless, right? It uses the magnet instead of the electrode.
Well, it still has a ballast, but yeah, exactly. It doesn't have the dual electrodes on the ends. Those two prongs that you'll see essentially that you screw into the socket.
It's almost like a permanent type of, because the bulb's supposed to last for 10 years. So in reference to like T5 or T8, T12 bulb, your bulb's going to last an extremely long time. And it has a detachable piece of mercury, which is kind of cool because, in 10 years when you go to replace it, you can detach the mercury. But the ballast that's inside of it, I don't know.
Well, if a digital ballast would last up to 10 years, not many of these lighting companies would even be in business.
Yeah, we recommend at Monster Gardens, even for standard HID digital ballast, is that growers will get about 3 to 5 years worth of use, about the time of their warranty.
I was going to say, isn't it funny how that's the warranty period?
And so, they get brittle. They have a lot of microchips that are cooled, but they still are hot, and just over time things degrade. It's funny, even used ballast. Be careful buying used digital ballast, because when they start moving around after they've situated in a grow room for years, just cooking and cooking and cooking night after night, they become brittle. And the moment you take like a really established digital ballast that's been sitting in a grow room for a really long time down, and you move it around to like another grow, we've had growers go, wow, I see this huge failure rate in my ballast that I've been using for 3 years that I just moved to another place. It's because they're really brittle by the time they've been heated up that many times. So it's really interesting off the experience we've seen. But specifically, I'm sorry, I'm getting off topic. Fluorescence. Induction fluorescence, we don't see the ballast lasting that long, but I've tested the output of induction fluorescence watt to watt over a T5. And I see about 3 to 5% efficiency over a T5, but not enough to warrant the cost, because the industrial fluorescents are quite costly. What I liked over T5s for vegetative growth, for vegging clones, I thought that was the perfect niche, because you have a plant that's not like a mother where it's extremely tall and you need depth penetration. You have a plant that's maybe up to 1 foot or 2 feet tall. You can get great growth with T5, tight internodal spacing, great flower development, but you also get an even distribution of light from one end of the rack to the other. No plant rotation like you would have with a 400 watt metal halide or something similar if you're using that. I mean, you can have a great veg room with metal halides if you have a lot of them stacked in a room. But if you're in a smaller grow, fluorescents, T5 specifically, are probably going to be your best tool, especially with a low amount of grow space available to you. You could take a racking system and create what we used to call the bunk bed type of system, where there's almost like different racks vertical with T5s, easy to manage. So fluorescents, they definitely have their niche, definitely on the veg side. Induction fluorescence, almost more of a fancy option. I don't think it's a huge opportunity right now. But what's the next one we have on the list to talk about? LEDs.
Talk about LEDs. The biggest thing before diving into necessarily these next few lights is, as we talked earlier, HIDs do make up a huge majority of the market. And so I see, as this industry is expanding, as people are starting to get into this more or starting to expand their particular facility, they're looking for more inexpensive options. LEDs are definitely trying to fill that void. The only thing about the LEDs is they're known to not necessarily have the broad spectrum. They're known to not necessarily have the intensity. Well, we've done a ton of testing here, and we have tested all the major LED brands, and we've come out with the LumiGrow being kind of the king LED. I mean, the fact that it's made in America has an unbelievable warranty. It's quality controlled to the finest.
I agree. It has dials. You've tested
you can adjust it.
I mean, it has what we call the top tier LEDs. There's only 2 other LEDs that we've tested that are even close, and they're all neck and neck within percentage points of each other. But the LumiGrow we've kept behind because it's been, one, the largest company that's been provided the most consistent product, that's made here in California, circuit boards and everything. And they are, of course, using the top bin LEDs, which is why they're testing so high. But this group is kept with innovation. They have a lot of features, and their price point is very reasonable in regards to what you get equipment-wise, plus making a commercial level fixture.
Right. I was just going to say that they are commercial grade.
I mean, you've seen it. It's got the waterproof, water resistant features. It really has everything a grower would need now with wireless control, which is fantastic.
And you mentioned the dials. I mean, you now have an LED that might be pricey up front, but at the same time, you don't have to buy one for your veg room and one for your flower room.
For commercial ability, where do we see LEDs? We see them as supplemental for greenhouse is a great option.
We see them supplementally in greenhouse or just being in conjunction with your HPS.
Yeah,
you're going to have the ability to tweak the spectrum slightly.
Standalone LEDs, I don't see the commercial ability right now.
Not broad enough.
The viability of it being commercial it could be there in some situations, but you're going to get much more of a gain as using your HPS as your driver and your LED as your compensator, or to add that additional spectrum to play with. We've talked before in videos about creating your proprietary lighting recipe, and products like the LumiGrow being able to dial any wavelength in between in combination with your HPS to create your own spectrum that will make a plant taste more spicy to sweet almost with its terpene production. So that's really cool. So LEDs I see as having a tremendous ability to deviate from the norm and try unique things, but maybe not the driver commercially for most production gardens.
Nice for a personal garden, maybe just for personal consumption. It's fine like that, but for commercial applications, they do work a little better in combination with HPS, or just simply in combination with the sun in a greenhouse. You need to still have that broad spectrum for ideal production flowering.
Definitely. LEP, light emitting plasma. They went from 300 watt to 270 watt. A lot of them use the Luxem light engine from California. There's another company called Rocket Plasma, and they have an interesting plasma as well. But for me, the pitfall of plasmas, though they have a great spectrum, the closest to sunlight of all of these, is the fact that they just don't have the intensity.
Right.
Coral growers use them. We've seen people use them as supplemental lighting fixtures, similar to like what we talked about with the LEDs. But I still think the LEDs are cool because of the ability that you can manipulate the spectrum more. You have more room to play with that additional support testing component that goes in combination with your HPS that's driving the garden, where the plasma's stuck at pretty much a singular spectrum. It's the 4101 or the 4102 on the Luxem light engine to create more of a veg to more of a slightly enhanced for flowering spectrum. But the intensity and the cost, it's something that I just don't see the commercial relationship to most of our growers. What do you think, Stu?
I mean, it's you really kind of covered all bases there. I mean, the only thing I really would like to say how I would potentially see this used as a commercial application is for the essential oil producing growers out there. People that are trying to use these supplementally.
Yeah,
there is a heavy amount of ultraviolet light in these plasma lights. So, if you're using them toward the end of flowering, or if you're just using them supplementally with your HPS, granted they aren't as intense as HPS, so they're going to be mounted a little lower. So you might have a little bit of a shadow there, which is an issue.
Yeah, that's
at the same time you're broadening up your spectrum.
For in a commercial setting, if you have a large budget and you are looking for a light to create a great vegetative opportunity, the plasma is a great option. It's going to be the Bentley of options, and maybe not the Corvette, the Bentley, but it is a great option. I have a story to tell you about plasmas. So a friend of mine was testing the plasmas 3 years ago when the Gavitas first came in the U.S. market. He got combinations of them, and in a grow tent, he grew 2 600 watt HPS with a plasma in the middle, because that was the best balancing. He could find, wattage to wattage instead of 1,000. And then he would do 2 plasmas to 1 600 watt. He was growing and he had a mite outbreak. And of course, what happens, growers start really analyzing where it came from, what's going on. And what he noticed was something very interesting. In both tents, because he could quantify it because his plasma to HPS ratio was different, both tents, that the mites would gravitate to the plants in the HPS and not to the plasma. And, he showed me pictures of the same variety of plant he was growing in the same tent with the same nutrients in the same soil, same conditions, under the 2 different lights. The rigidity, that look of the leaf that you can see as a defined genetic characteristic, when the plant is that healthy, that the leaf looks like it's from outside. And that's what it was really unique. But then we thought more about that. And actually, he was looking at the tissue samples, and he was looking at the difference of the plants. And what we noticed was the tissue was thicker under the plasma. And that's why the mites were gravitating to other plants, because they were getting away from the most healthy plants in the garden and going away to the plants that they could drink the juice and eat the tissue much more easily. So that was interesting. So yeah, I could see a great vegetative potential, though very expensive with plasmas in a commercial application.
So that does bring up the next light, which is very similar to the plasma as far as the broad spectrum. But it is a little more intense as far as the testing results show. And that's the LEC, the light emitting ceramic, commonly known as a ceramic metal halide.
You're such a gentleman, Steve. You said a little bit. Come on. You saw the test. It was a lot more intense.
Okay, you're right. It was quite a big difference, especially when you compare them apples to apples. I mean, it's 315 watts compared to the 270 watts. So definitely in the same realm, and it's quite a big difference. You'll be able to see the test results published on our website here after this.
We actually just completed a video where we gave the 15% difference in wattage to equate what the actual basically par 2 watt or micromole 2 watt output was, and it was like a 40% difference. The LEC being more intense. Right about there. So that's something to know. And the price point, what do you?
It's it's a little less than half the cost.
Okay, the LEC, right?
The LEC is. So, I mean, in my opinion, it's a no-brainer. At the same time, a lot of people like the technology of the plasma. The bulb is designed to last a bit longer. So as far as bulb costs, it might weigh out.
Do you know what I don't like about the plasma? Is the fact that the first generation we saw in the U.S. did not have Faraday cages on the actual plasma units.
Now they do.
And now they do. The fact that it's driving a microwave, now that I go back, I talked about the commercial application. Now, if I had 100 of these in a room, I might not want to hang out in that room for 8 hours at a time. I could be wrong. I could be just, paranoid. But in my opinion, that's just a personal concern of mine. So the LEC, to me, standard driver, standard technology, but upgraded by Philips because it now has the 315 watt Philips horticultural spec bulb.
Right.
But there's a high replacement cost of that bulb. You probably replace it annually. Still over a metal halide, I see a spectral benefit, but I think for large commercial applications, metal halides in the 600 to 1,000 watt range are still going to be king over the LEC.
Especially for deep penetration. If you're growing large mothers, you're going to want that penetration, or you're just going to get quality clones at the top half of the plant. You want large cuttings all over.
But if you're growing small plants and veg and you want something a leg up over a fluorescent, I could definitely see a 315.
Oh yeah.
But nice. Now they have the 630s.
630s are nice. I was kind of waiting for them to come out, and I'm really excited to do the testing on them. They just came out, and so I haven't had a chance to put it under the spectrometer. But the 315 I tested quite a bit.
The 630 is...
I'm looking forward to seeing the 630.
I can't wait to see the test. I know you're testing it right now, and I can't wait to see your test. But I just, I don't see it viable in a greenhouse, obviously, because of the size.
Blocks too much sun.
Anything that's going to block the sun is not going to be something that's a highly attractive fixture. The whole idea with greenhouse application is to have as less of a shade footprint as possible, and that's why fixtures like PL, are in our minds one of the highest end DE fixtures available on the market, have always been the number one choice or the number one option in the greenhouse community. I mean, I think PL makes up 67% of total commercial horticulture sales. So I think what does give you to like 13%?
About 13, yeah.
So and it's because of the way the fixture is designed. I mean, PL also has the most advanced reflector and other things too. But that is the concept: a thin, easy to mount fixture that is not shading the sun. Number one, we don't see that with the LECs. We don't see that with a lot of other fixtures. But for warehouse lighting, if you're doing mothering, if you're doing vegging, the LEC 630 is a great opportunity. I think it's a great opportunity. But if you're doing mothering that's much larger than maybe, let's say, 3 to 4 feet, you're doing 5 foot, 6 foot mothers, you're definitely going to be looking at 1,000 watt metal halides as your only sole opportunity to really have good optimized growth. So
the thing to talk about, there is 2 bulb options for the LEC. They make the 4200 Kelvin bulb as well as the 3100 Kelvin bulb. The 4200 Kelvin bulb is sold separate, and so it is a bulb upgrade, and you're going to notice more of a blue light, a little more UV coming off of that lamp. So this one might be used more as their supplemental light versus their 3100 Kelvin bulb would be used In theory, you could flower under it because it has a broader spectrum. Still, Monster Gardens recommends them to be used, like you had mentioned, Ryan, the mothering light, the vegetative light. But if you're the kind of person who wants to experiment or is used to using something closer to the 4200 Kelvin bulb, that is a bulb upgrade that you could buy.
If you're growing for essential oil production, and that's your real focus, you're doing
you're
some
trying
sort
to bring
of
out quality.
Yeah. So if that is your focus for you're growing for essential oil production, and you're not growing so much on the flower size or weight production, an LEC 630 garden would do fabulous in a warehouse. You guys that are using extraction equipment, definitely something to look at. I think that is going to be the most cost-efficient fixture for those guys to be able to utilize the best essential oil production.
I mean, it's just kind of like how our skin tans. We're putting on sunscreen to protect our skin from the ultraviolet radiation. That's what plants are doing, is they're putting out their essential oils, and that's basically acting like a sunscreen for them. And so they're trying to beef up the tissue, like you had mentioned with the plasma story. Plants are going to boost out their oils and resins, and that acts like a sunscreen. And so if you can promote more UV, ultraviolet, more UV into your spectrum, your plants are going to just boost quality. I mean, that's what's going to be their defense mechanism, is putting out that resin, and the resin is what's giving you higher test quality results.
So I'm a commercial garden. I have 30 to 100 HPS DE grow lights right now. I need more quality out of my production. Maybe I'm doing extractions. Maybe I'm just growing for better flower quality. What's going to be the most cost-efficient option to add that quality to my crop?
The first thing that comes to my mind is the metal halide. I mean, that's going to be the most cost-effective way to do it.
Yeah, I agree.
If you want a little broader spectrum, obviously that's when you start looking toward the plasma or the LEC. But when we're surely talking cost-effective, the metal halide would still be the king.
I am the same grower, and I'm looking to build some sort of proprietary growing recipe. For my specific production, what would I choose?
Well, my first recommendation would be the LED, specifically the LumiGrow, because as you change your different varieties of plant, you can change the variety of spectrum.
Okay, I'm a commercial grower. I'm looking for the best mothering fixture for a plant that's going to be growing up to 5 feet tall.
Up to 5 feet tall, I would say the light emitting ceramic. If it's going to be any larger than that, I would still stick with the metal halide 1000 watt.
Okay. Well, thanks. I appreciate you talking about this topic today. I think everybody that was listening to this, whether it was the video version or the podcast, I hope you got something out of it. And I appreciate you for taking the time and listening. And if you need any of this equipment, feel free to contact mgccscultivationsuppliers.com, and look forward to the other videos we have. We have many lighting videos and many more to come.
Definitely. Thank you for having me.